Hi, and welcome to the Handbag Designer 101 podcast with your host, Emily Blumenthal, handbag designer expert and handbag fairy godmother, where we cover everything about handbags from making, marketing, designing, and talking to handbag designers and industry experts about what it takes to make a successful handbag. Welcome, Lauren Parker, to Handbag Designer 101, the podcast. Lauren, you are the director of Fairchild Studio. Amongst other things, you and I go way back. Selfishly, I love having people on that it's kind of like a no-brainer, low-lift conversation just because you and I go so far back in terms of handbags and fashion and accessories. So why don't you introduce yourself and just explain what exactly the director of Fairchild Studios does? And then we can dive right in.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Thank you so much for having me. You know, I love chatting with you. And I'll try to stay focused on business so we don't start talking about our kids again.
Oh, my gosh.
But, always a good topic. Yeah. So, yes, I'm the director of Fairchild Studio, which is Fairchild Media Group, which encompasses WWD, Sourcing Journal, Footwear News, and Beauty Inc. We all sit on the same floor. We all sit next to each other, share ideas, share content. And a lot of what I do is responsible. What the studio does is all the sponsored things that clients purchase. So whether it's a sponsored webinar, a sponsored fireside chat, a sponsored podcast, reports are always multi-sponsors. We might have 13 sponsors in a report. You know, we'll do a Q&A, branded content. We have articles that live on the site. We have white papers that might be 12 pages that are sponsored. And then Sourcing Journal and, WWD, Footwear News, they also hold summits and events. So we do panels up on stage. So I do a lot of moderating. So it's really interviewing, moderating, editing, all the stuff I've been doing for 30 plus years in my career. And it's been great. You know, I don't know if you want me to run through my
Girl, we're starting at the beginning, but real quick, just for people listening who don't know, what's a white paper? Let's just, have you explain that.
Okay, so a white paper is a report on one company. So it's usually a case study or multiple case studies. So it might be a tech provider or that would talk about how a retailer is using their product. So something like that.
So it's almost in some sense like an advertorial. Explaining their product, how it's used, what are the unique selling points and why it has value.
Exactly. And, from the studio, all these things, like I say, they are sponsored, but we try to approach them with a thought leadership perspective. So it's not just like a big ad for the company. You're basically talking about what's the state of the industry? What is the problem? And how are you solving it? So, of course, you're backing into it and talking about your company. But ideally, if you can talk about how retailers are using your product, it makes a little bit more sense and more interesting. So we always try to bring, even on the fireside chats, we'll have the client, but they'll bring in someone from Abercrombie and they'll talk about, or, in a webinar. So we always try to bring retailers in whenever possible, just so retailers who are paying attention to it can kind of see themselves and think, how would this help me?
Do you think it's, because the advertising paid side historically was on a totally different side of the floor from the content editorial side. And back in the day, when the worlds met, it was very much like church and state. Right. Unless it's like, even from the scene from Devil Wears Prada, where she's like, where are our advertisers? So, right. Trying to incorporate, because they're advertising, we need to make sure that they get the face time. Do you think that compromises the value of the content because you're essentially promoting somebody who paid to get their message out or amplified?
Well, we're always, you have to be transparent legally. So when you write a sponsored content article, it says sponsored, or it says advertorial, or it says in partnership with. So there's no sneaking in, right. It's illegal to do a pay-per play like that. And, we have plenty of people who advertise who just run an ad, right? Just, a brand ad, a camera ready ad, and they don't have any editorial at all.
Right.
So, it's a mix. But like I said, there is a lot of content. If you go on all these people in the industry now, they have content on their own sites. Yeah. They have blogs. They're producing white papers that you can download. So there's so much content. They want to tell stories that you can't always get that point across in just a picture of a product or a brand ad. So that's why they want these articles. That's why they want to sit down with an editor or sit down with me from the studio and talk for 12 minutes about, what's happening in the industry. So I wouldn't say it compromises it. Like I said, it's always very transparent. If we do a fireside chat and we have the tile, we have the two headshots, we have their logo on it. So there's no sneaking in that it's editorial if it's not. So I wouldn't say it compromises it.
Do you think the brands that haven't been able to sustain themselves, I don't mean sustainability, I mean like continue the realm of their own legacy, with the advent of social media and social shopping and all of these out of the box ways to pitch, sell, promote your product, those who perhaps haven't incorporated this idea of storytelling white papers, those are the ones, in my opinion, who always bitch and moan like, oh, the business is so tough. The business is so bad. It's awful because anybody, like specifically, I can speak to handbags. You tell anybody going into handbags, talking to somebody who's been in the industry, they're all so bitter and sour. You know what I'm talking about. It's like, oh, don't do it. The business is tough. The business is awful. But do you think it's just a matter of, is the business tough and awful, or are people just shopping differently? And those who can survive have had to reinvent themselves to move along with the consumption of media.
I mean, look, there's so many brands, and not even, in handbags, really in anything in apparel. I always say, first time I ever went to a trade show, because I've always been in B2B publishing. It's
business to business publishing.
Yeah, business to business publishing versus, consumer facing publishing. And they go to the trade shows too. But, you walk the aisles and you just see there's just hundreds and hundreds of brands. And you think, who are these people that think that there's another need, that there's a need for like yet another brown handbag or whatever. So they don't all survive. There's always going to be a shakeout. And then, of course, you have, big companies kind of buy up some of these smaller indie brands. And sometimes that's the goal for these brands. They want to make a name for themselves via social media or kind of do it their own way with the goal of getting bought up by a company that has money. So that's one path, of course. And, what's interesting now, this whole, like you said, social media, social shopping, self-promotion, I'm going to date myself, but I was doing this before the internet. Yeah, so it's like you had to run an ad if you wanted to get known or do a trade show. There is no other way. And now you can self-promote. You could put your stuff on LinkedIn. You could get these lists and do email blasts and do, social shopping and all that. But usually people will combine it with some sort of industry promotion because, a site like WWD or Sourcing Journal or Footwear News, they have these lists that they have a reach that they go out to and a cloud because they're writing business articles and people are reading it every day that, you don't have if you're just self-promoting. Right. Then it is totally self-promotional. But if you're kind of in the world of a newsletter and they're writing about some, huge earth-shattering news that happened and you're the fourth piece, even if it's a sponsored piece, that newsletter is going out to, 100,000 people. So you get the eyeballs that way. So I do think you need some sort of combination platform of, you have to do your self-promotion. And then, of course, you could tell your own story any way you want. And like I said, you're seeing more people on their own website really writing very in-depth articles. They hire a content editor and they're producing their own content. Sometimes we'll say to this company, because they'll hire us to write an article for them. And I'll say, you have some really good stuff on your own site. Do you want us to just kind of link it out in a promoted e-blast? And we'll link to your own white paper. Right. And you could just download it that way. Because, when you download a white paper, you collect leads. People have to fill in their name and their address. So that's something another thing through the studio, we come up with lead gen, which is very, very important.
I mean, that's when people are growing their brand or trying to maintain their brand, all of that is what's the cost of customer acquisition. So you have to amortize that. Like, well, if I'm putting out a white paper and it's an opportunity for me to get these leads, then it's totally worth it.
Yeah. So even when we have an event, we have a summit, we have one coming up in LA, Sustainability Summit. This is with Sourcing Journal. Everyone who sponsors or everyone who buys a ticket to attend, they get all the leads of everyone who attends. So there's all different ways where you can build community in the industry and connect people, and they get all those emails and all those leads. And if we do, let's say we do a report for 3 months, we're pushing it out on social media once a week on, LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and of course it links to, the download page. And so we're collecting leads for 3 months.
Right.
So we collect them at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So it's ongoing. So there's just a lot of opportunity.
Does the brand get those leads at the end? Is that part of what they pay for, is the leads that are collected?
Yeah, so they get them 3 times. They get the first pull at 30 days and the second pull at 60 days and then the third pull at 90 days. So, and then of course, they can promote it on their own site, but we don't want to just give them the video. We'll give them a clip, but have it linked back to our lead gen form. Because if they just take the video and put it on their site, then they're not really collecting leads.
Right.
And what I've learned is it's not, how many people watch a webinar. They're always like, what are the titles? What are the names? Is it all C-suite? It's not just quantity, it's quality. You can have an event with 1,000 people, but if they're the wrong people, it doesn't matter. But if you have an event with 200 people and they're like all the executives that you've been trying to reach for 2 years, that makes a difference. So it's really quality,
Yeah. So I want to, because I think this is all so interesting. I walk every trade show. Mm-hmm. And I was at Licensing Expo recently, and then I was at the Fancy Food Fair, the Fancy Food Show. And
that'd be fun.
Oh my God, it was amazing. If anybody can get an invite, I strongly recommend, because they say come hungry. Because everyone's there. It's just, it's ridiculous. The food is just insane. And Licensing Expo, I think they were saying it was one of the best, but it wasn't massive. But the essence of interactivity at these shows makes them worth going. Mm-hmm. And I've been to the most recent round of trade shows. And as a designer or a small brand or an independent brand or even an established brand, I struggle with trying to recommend being part of trade shows unless you're one of those, I call them trade show gypsy brands, where that's their lifeline, where they're at every single trade show. They go to, they're in Atlanta at the gift show, then the apparel show, and then the footwear show, and then they just do that circuit. It's really interesting because I feel like the big shows don't serve the purpose anymore that they used to.
Yeah, well, it's really exhausting. And I think if you're a very small brand, you don't always have the resources. A lot of times you'll see in a brand, they have their husband there, or they maybe have their kid helping out. And you can't be at 4 trade shows at once because you don't have 4 sets of samples, or it's too expensive to make all those samples. So it can be exhausting, but I think, they can be really inspiring. You see people in the industry, there's panel discussions. I've sat on panels and I've moderated panels, and usually people, you get kind of jazzed up when you go to these shows. So it depends if you're looking at it like the dollar ROI, which might be hard to quantify, but I think if you're in the industry, you should at least go to something. You don't want to just be like sitting and making product in your living room and shipping it out. I mean, I guess you would do that if you just have this like D2C model and you're just doing it on your own. But if you really want to connect with retailers, it's not only about getting into Macy's, it's about, thousands of independent stores that are around the country. And the way to really connect with them is to go to a trade show, because they're literally walking the aisle. But I mean, it's tough to kind of wrangle them into your booth. But people have I've seen everything. Some people come up with really clever booths and really fun and eye-catchy, and it just makes you want to go in and be like, what's happening here? What do you do? What do you make? So I think you need to be smart and creative and not just do like a, what do they call it? Pipe and drape.
Yeah. Yeah. The last trade show I went to that was packed was because she had a tarot card reader. And people line up for that. And I just keep thinking, like, even at the like B2B level at a trade show, you want people to come in. You have to be clever. You have to be on the box. You have to be creative, or else, unless your product is so groundbreaking, which I think is physically impossible right now, there's got to be, I don't want to say gimmick, but there has to be a story around it to make it worth even stopping by.
Right. And I've heard stories of people, they have their friends come and kind of mill around the booth so the booth looks busy, because when you walk by, you think, what's going over there?
Yeah.
This booth is empty and the booth next to it is 30 people in it. So you can kind of create your own buzz. It's almost like a restaurant that puts a velvet rope and there's people waiting in line, and then you get in and there's nobody
empty
there. Right.
Oh
but you can create a bit of that hype, I think, if you have a little creativity.
You know what I did for my brand 800 million thousand years ago? I put an ad on Craigslist and I hired models. I mean, in some cities, I didn't even know what they looked like because there was really no way for me to find out.
Right.
But I would pay them hourly to go to the mall and bring their friends, whichever store had it, at key point times, to pick up the product, act with the product, and then come back, and then just to make it look like there's a huddle. Because to spend, I don't know, $100 for 2 hours worth of pretty girls looking at your product, the sell-through showed for it.
No, it's true. I mean, look, when I go into bookstores and I see my friends' books, I always take those books and put them on top. It's like you need, it takes a village, right? So you need to create a little bit of hype. And I think also you do need good product. I mean, you could have all the hype you want. If the product is not there, it's not going to matter. But, for an editor, when, I've been an editor my whole life, and when you're pitching an editor, it helps to have a good story. You have a hook, you have a good story, because people want something to write about instead of like, here's a new bag and it's brown and it's leather, and it needs to have a good story because people like a good story. And now everyone kind of wants a sustainability story, if there is one, that they can kind of weave into the narrative and something to write about, because consumers are asking about sustainability. And that's something that we do write about a lot. So I think it's smart that companies who have something good to say in that world pay attention to it, put it on their website, and use it when they pitch to an editor.
But do you think, like, from the sustainability angle, it really is tough. And I speak to this with my students, that if you can't afford to incorporate sustainability because it is expensive, make sure you at least have one piece of your collection that is. So at least it gives the overview that you are being transparent, at least about a portion, or you're making an effort somewhere, somehow. Do you think that's enough?
I think it's interesting you brought that up. It can be a bit of a catch-22. And sometimes big retailers, let's say they do an H&M or
they call it greenwashing for that.
Well, let's say they come up with a collection that's completely sustainable. It's recycled. It's using 50% less water to produce. It's made with ethical processes. X, Y, and Z is completely legit. And they're so proud of it and they're so excited. And they do a whole ad campaign and they say, look, we created this, check this out, write about it. It's, 10% of our line. And then people say, well, what about the other 90%? So the other 90% of your line is like, child labor. I'm just joking.
Yeah.
But like sometimes it can create this dichotomy where you're saying, well, this is great, but then it can draw attention to that the rest is not. And one thing that people tell me is you can't let perfection get in the way of progress. So if you are doing something that first of all, it's just a great credo in life to live by. You can embroider it on a pillow or something. But they're saying that you shouldn't be afraid to make a sustainable collection of 10% because people might say, what about the other 90%? Because it's moving in the right direction and it brings awareness. And then maybe the next year it would be 50%, or you know what I'm saying? Like it's progress. And you try to invite people on, as they call it, your sustainable journey. And you try to be really transparent and you write about it in your blog and you explain what you're doing and you say, look, we're not there yet, but we're working towards it. And to just be really transparent can be a way, instead of just saying, oh, well, these bags are vegan. And then, but actually they're made of plastic, which is actually not very sustainable. But yes, no animal was harmed in the making of this. So consumers are kind of wising up to that a bit.
But do you think from a journalistic point of view that brands, designers, small brands, designers, because I think a lot of people, what makes them go to PU or what they call vegan leather, which is a load of BS, we both know that they're going to the faux materials because they can't afford leather, and therefore that becomes their scope. And is it easier for a PU-based brand, the quote-unquote vegan leather brand, to be sustainable versus a leather brand? Because a leather brand can be sustainable too. If you ever wanted to start a handbag line and didn't know where to start, this is for you.
Living proof that independent designers can make it big.
Emily Blumenthal is one prime example.
If you had dreams of becoming a handbag designer and didn't know where to start, this is for you. If you have a handbag brand and are in need of strategy and direction, this is for you. I'm Emily Blumenthal, handbag fairy godmother and handbag designer expert, and this is Handbag Designer 101, the masterclass. Over the next 10 classes, I will break down everything you need to know how to make, market, and manufacture a handbag. Broken down for you that you'll not only skip steps in that handbag building process, but also save money in that learning curve. For the past 20 years, I've been teaching at the top fashion universities in New York City, created the Handbag Awards, and also the Handbag Designer 101 podcast. I'm going to show you like I have countless brands from sketch to sample to shelf, whether you're just starting out and don't know where to begin, or even if you have a handbag line and just need some strategic direction, the Handbag Designer 101 Masterclass is just for you. So let's get started, and you will be the creator of the next it bag. Join me, Emily Blumenthal, with the Handbag Designer 101 Masterclass.
Well, leather, some people say leather is not so great either because you have to tan it. Right. And there's certain chromium, there's certain chemicals that are used in the tanning of leather. And of course, even though leather is a food byproduct, cows are very detrimental to the environment. So, if you got rid of cows completely, if, the whole world wasn't eating meat and was vegan and you wouldn't have leather, that would probably be better on the earth. So even though I love leather, there's a lot of people say, well, leather handbags aren't so great either. I mean, look, the answer to all this is just not to buy anything. So, look, when you work in fashion, it's funny, all these brands talk about how they're making this item more sustainable, which is good. But to really be sustainable would be if nobody bought anything. But, that's not going to happen. Right. So you try to be more sustainable. But yeah, for small brands, it's tricky. They're small and they don't have the money and they're going to make what they make and work with what they work with. And it's not going to be perfect. And right. At certain price points, I don't think people expect it to be sustainable. I mean, look, people are shopping on Shein and Temu, China. I mean, that's not sustainable.
No.
And they're still making stuff. So look, there's a market for it. But no, I was just going to say that, it's up to consumers to consume and purchase how they want to. So I guess you could just say you're giving them options and they could buy it or not buy it.
I always tell the brands, I teach this too when people, I should have you as a guest speaker. I'm totally going to do that this semester. I have to book my schedule. So consider yourself booked. I'll just tell you the deal. Okay. I have to work backwards. I can't even know. But I say people frown upon saying, this particular product, we are going to give away X percentage of sale. And I always say that's a mistake because there's never a guarantee, number one, that product will sell. Number two, if it doesn't, then what are you going to say? $2,000 or say, we were able to gift. I always say, if you're going to have a socially responsible part of your brand, make sure it's something that it can continue in an ongoing basis, that it's an act of give back. We work with this particular group and on an ongoing basis, we support what they're doing, or we specifically use their product, their handwoven materials for this particular bag. Therefore, enforcing that we are always keeping some sort of element of social responsibility to a give back. I think that.
Oh, you mean versus like one item to say this one bag is going to donate.
Like we're going to give 50%. Or it's never 50%. They always say a percentage of sale. So they're never transparent about that. And that always bothers me because I don't know how many people are saying, well, how many sold? What was it? Which cost did you give?
Yeah, I mean, nobody's following up. No consumer is maybe somebody would, but no one's really following up a year later to say, how much did you really donate? How much was really made? It's more like if we're writing it up as an editor, we're saying, this is what it is. This is what it costs. They say they're going to do this. And, am I following up 8 months later to make sure they really did? No. So you have to kind of trust that people are honest.
Do you think from an editorial perspective, because I get these questions a lot and there's so few editors left where it's not pay to play. I mean, you said so yourself, like in this day and age, any publication, how many are actually print left? Not a lot, but anything that's even online, I know from the asks, like we need to make sure that we can connect it to an affiliate link. It needs to be sold through Amazon. How do you think a smaller designer can work around that to try and get covered?
Well, I wouldn't say that all editorial is pay to play. I mean, from my point of view, from the studio, that is pay to play. But like I said, that's not editorial. That is an advertorial, and it's specified. And, the editors are going around the industry trying to find what's new, trying to find the news. Some company that's a fashion brand that never had handbags launched a handbag line, that's news. So they're going to write about that. That's not a pay to play article. And then if that company, so that's going to go for edit. And then if they want to buy a fireside chat, 6 months later to talk about how it's doing, that's a paid sponsorship.
Right.
But I wouldn't say that it's all pay to play on the edit side. I wouldn't say that.
Do you think, though, and just because you've been pitched a quadrillion times, what do you think in this day and age are key points that you look for to ensure that someone is worthy of a story? Do you think a physical press release is still necessary? Do they need to have a large following on all social platforms? Like, what are the key points that you look for that you would say, you know what, they've got this, but they don't have that, therefore I cannot? Or, oh, you know what, that's enough.
I actually did a panel with you on this, remember?
I do.
Like 10 years ago on how to pitch an editor. And it all seems so obvious to me on how to pitch someone. And everyone was taking notes. And I was like, is this not obvious? That you have to include a picture? You have to include your website. So I always say, just from the logistics point of view, like forget even like the content for a second. Editors are really, really busy. They have like hundreds of emails. So it has to be easy, right? You shouldn't send an email. Can I send you some pictures and a pitch about my story? And then you have to write them back and say, yes, please send it to me. And then just send it, right?
Well, you're one of the people who does write back. So that's a side note. Not everybody does.
But if you say like, can I say, it's just one extra layer that maybe they'll miss it. So if you just send it, I think is helpful. I always say a press release is helpful. You can put quotes in there that if the editor doesn't have time to call and do an interview on their own, they can use a quote from the press release, which I think is really helpful. If it's something from the designer, maybe it's placed with a retailer and the retailer had a quote. I mean, that might be harder to get. And the other thing, so let's say you send the press release as an attachment. I think it's also really important to also cut and paste it in the body copy of the email. And maybe embed a picture in that, because so many people, they're on the go, they're on their subway, and they're like reading it on their phone, and they maybe can't download the whole press release to their phone, or they don't want to use their, they don't have enough space. Everyone has like 18 billion photos like I do. I can't even download things.
Oh my God, I just buy more memory at this point. I don't even know what's going to happen.
But if you just make it really easy, like they can see what the picture is, and then maybe you have a link to a Dropbox. So that's not eating up their data. You could link to more pictures. But, just be really clear and make the press release tell them, what it is, why it's unique, what it's made of, what's the price, what white space is it trying to fill. if you could give them all that information, so if they don't have time to call back, like I said, and do that follow-up interview, the information's already there. They don't have to make that call. Well, what's the price and where are you going to sell it? And it's just like anything that they might think to ask, if you could put that in the pitch, is very helpful. And then maybe this editor finds that at the last minute, a story fell through and they have the space that they have to fill by 5:00, and then they have your pitch and everything's already there. It's like good to go.
Right.
So
right.
That's always really helpful. And now as far as content, like I said, anytime there's something, you want to be different, but you don't want to be so different where the editor thinks, well, who would ever buy this? Because that's not so helpful either. So it has to be something that is still, wearable, usable.
I spoke to a designer not so long ago. And, I have a masterclass. I have a handbag designer 101 masterclass that basically, it speaks to what you just talked about, but it also covers all the things to avoid those pitfalls, like working with a sample maker is $7,000 today in New York City. And I have said, they're like, oh, that's so crazy. And I said, if you think about the time value of money that they need to put in to work with you, it actually isn't, because you probably won't come back. You're not prepared. You don't know how to work with them. You don't know how to speak with them. And it's going to have mistakes. So they might as well make money off of you and know that, you're not going to come back because you don't know what you're doing. So, that's why I created this masterclass to cut all that. So when you do finally speak to a sample maker, you're fluent with what they need, you're prepared, you've got everything ready. But there are still so many designers that are creating bags that are in the thousands because they think that it is something that's never been done before, and everybody is tired of wearing their Louis and Gucci and Chanel. And it's like, actually, nobody's tired of those bags. If anything, they're going to buy it on a circular economy, which we've just had we've just had some great speakers on the podcast speaking about that, from What Goes Around Comes Around and also from The Real Real. But in terms of creating a unique selling point, I think the burden really falls on the designers now. Like, there was this brand Opan. I don't know if you know them. They were from Singapore. And it is such a wild story about this brand. I'm so fascinated by it that they got all the right celebrities wearing it. And it was a geometric bag and it was cut in half on the side. So it was sloped. They never spoke about who they were. You never heard anything about the founders or the people. To my understanding, as somebody who was connected to a factory, and they made a lot of headway, and then they made an announcement, we're shutting down. I think they've been around for 3 years. But it's like, okay, buy it while you can. This is Taylor Swift's favorite bag. And I just was so fascinated. Like, I'm so dying to hear what the backstory is as to the who and the why. But
yeah, I think if people want to hear that backstory, especially if you want to be, consumers are more open to indie brands. They're not only buying the designer brands anymore, and they like the discovery, and they can discover them on social media and through all this self-promotion. But, if you're going to spend thousands of dollars on something, and yes, the quality has to be there. It can't just be, hype, but they're going to want to know the story, who are the designers and where did they source the material? Maybe it's from Italy or what, and now they talk about, cashmere, not in handbags, but in clothing. They show pictures of them on the trip to Mongolia, or, the cashmere, and they show the goats. People like that. So if you are going to charge that much money, I think you need to really work on your story. I mean, you don't want to make it up, but there should be a compelling story to go with something to make it worth that much money if the materials are really that high end, and you need to carry that story across.
Do you think, I've spoken about this, I know other people have, but it's interesting in terms of what other industries impact fashion and so forth, like colors and shapes. And like, for example, like the auto industry, and I'm only obviously speaking about handbags, but the connection between the color palette with cars going to handbags and the shapes and, certain ways things are being promoted and marketed. Do you find that is something that is indicative of what's to come? Or is there any other industry you can think like, look to this because it'll give you an idea of what's coming trend-wise?
Well, it's always so interesting to see how trends bubble up, from the bottom, which of course is so different how they were, 30 years ago when everything was just top down. I mean, now you have this Charlie XC. I mean, I don't want to get into politics, but this Charlie XCS, with this brat summer, and now Kamala Harris took that green color and put it on her homepage to use that color to tap into Gen Z. That's interesting, that these young people and that musicians are coming up with this stuff, or, Taylor Swift does something and all of a sudden, of course, the influencers and the celebrities are still, what they do really trickles up. But I always found it interesting when I watched these trend reports from Fashion Snoops or WGSN, and they have like their fashion colors and, their fashion reports, but then they have one from another industry. And I'm always like, is it that different?
Right.
Well, I guess it is. If you're going to do homewares, home decor, it's going to be more simple and, beige and gray. And now everything is like sage. But of course, in apparel, it could be anything.
Right.
So, but yeah, there's this whole, you're starting to see a lot of sage green in home decor, which I think is interesting. But you're also seeing the bright green in apparel. So it's like the colors kind of come out and then they're appropriated by different industries in different ways. Like that Barbie pink, was such a big thing. You didn't really see Barbie pink in home decor. Maybe you'd see it in a pillow or something, but it was so big in apparel and I guess in handbags too. But maybe it'll segue into like a berry if the pink is too young or too bright.
Well, right now, vintage pink, which is kind of like a dirty pink, is trending. And I don't know. I am an outlier. I've never liked pink. It's never been for me. It's never been anything I've wanted to be part of. But I tried actually with one of my brand launches to push what they called Gen Z yellow. And I have a dear friend who was a designer who got really burnt out and then just opened up a toy store in upstate New York. And I was telling her for my next brand that I'm launching with Savvy Susanna for kids and handbags. And I was talking to her about another particular kids jewelry brand where the boxes are yellow and so clean and so refined. And she said to me, it would sell better if it's pink. And I said, you've got to be kidding. And she said, look, as industry people, as designers, we can only dictate so much. We do not control the pervading view of how people consume. And you can say that we are segmenting, that we aren't segmenting for gender. We have everything that way. Everything is for everybody. But at the end of the day, blue sells better for boys, pink sells better for girls. And you can't fight that if you want your product to sell. So there's only so much pioneer you can be if you're creating a product that you want people to buy, right? It's like, how much can you afford to go trying to change the world before you realize, okay, people aren't going to buy this. I'm going to have to give in. Like that point is
I think you can personalize within, I forget, there was a great phrase. I think it was called collective individualism that I heard. So everyone's going to have an iPhone, right? I'll have an Android, but everyone has a cell phone.
I know you do.
But then everyone's going to decorate that phone in different ways. You're going to have a different type of case, or you're going to have a different home screen on it. So it's like, it's collective that everyone has it, but you still want to stand out in your own way. Or everyone's going to wear jeans, but some people are going to wear baggy jeans and some people are going to, so you still have to know what the overarching trends are that people want. I think you can't just completely design in a vacuum and just think it's going to sell because you like it. I think you need to know what's happening.
Your customer.
Exactly, because different customers want different things. So, it's not easy, but there are so many brands out there. And now, with the internet and social media, you have all the copycats that you didn't have that as much, decades ago. I mean, of course, people would always riff off each other, but now it's like, I remember at Accessories Magazine, there was a company I saw at a trade show and I really liked them. I wanted to do a story on them and they said no, because once we put it in your magazine, it's just going to get copied because it's spreading the word. I said, well, I guess that's a risk.
Right.
You're getting exposure. So you could say exposure is a catch-22, but I guess you have to make the decision. Is it worth it to you or not? No one's going to buy it if you don't get any exposure, but someone might copy it. You can't really sue them for copy infringement if you're a tiny brand. And by the time you do and spend all that money, the trend's over anyway. So it's like.
And I've told designers this, that again, the green designers, not green as in sustainable, green as in new, but how they walk around with NDAs, non-disclosure agreements that they want factories to sign or editors to sign or me to sign. And I said, bless your cotton socks. I'll sign it, but no one's knocking you. No one's knocking you off until you have a product that sells.
Right.
If you have a product that doesn't sell, you could make a handbag that's an upside down vase and say that it's the messiah of handbags and you split the atom. But if no one's buying it, no one's going to copy it. It's that simple, I just want to wrap up with some, and I know you cover all categories, but just specifically to handbags, if you can give your final thoughts on handbags, thoughts, trends, anything that people can take away in that capacity, just purely based on your experience.
I find the whole vintage trend really interesting. And what's interesting is how, brands are realizing that they didn't want to sell their used stuff on their own site, but then they realized that
wild.
But I get it. And they thought, well, we just want to keep making new and sell new. But then they realized that customers were buying it anyway. Yeah. So it's money lost on the table. So I found it really interesting how these big brands are partnering with companies and putting this kind of the used element, they're on their navigation bar. And then someone like Coach, created Coachtopia, where they're using their own, offcuts and recycled material to make bags that are wholly recycled. So I think it's really interesting when big companies have enough material that they can kind of create something like that, do something like that. And then there's, a lot of these material innovations, we were saying, getting back to what we were talking about, vegan leather. There's a think tank called the Material Innovation Initiative, MII. I did a panel with them. And again, it's a little fringe, but, they're exploring it, scientists, and they're apple skins and apple skin leather and mushroom leather and pineapple leather.
I did a TikTok about that. I did like the fruit salad of handbag fruit leather, purely for that. Like green, orange, pineapple, mushroom. Well, mushrooms aren't fruit, but going through the whole gamut, orange peels, I know potato skins, like there's ways, apple skins, the same thing.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. And there's a company I met called Inversa Leathers. I don't know if you've heard of them. It's a leathers company, but skins, but they make materials out of all invasive species. So like the lionfish, which apparently eats all the coral and, destroys all the coral. So I did an ESG Outlook column with them, but so they're not just taking something that's in high, you could say bamboo is very sustainable because, it grows back like a weed. So it regenerates itself. But these invasive skins, they're actually like fish that are detrimental. So they're in certain types of python, whatever, I forget, but they're creating materials that, they sell to handbag companies and whatnot. And so they're doing good in that way because they're actually removing things that are detrimental from the environment. So again, it's kind of fringe, but it's a really nice story because it feels like it is moving the industry forward. And these are some things to keep an eye on, or people who are taking vintage and not just selling a vintage item, but reworking it, taking it apart and putting it back together and making it modern.
Right.
With, a scarf, whatever it is, a scarf woven through it or something, just something that can make it their own and they feel like they're a designer instead of just shopping thrift stores and saying, this is vintage. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to take the old, make it new, make new things out of alt materials is very exciting. As far as trends, I defer to you. I can't even keep up with all the trends these days.
Now. Lauren, thank you so much for being part of this. Lauren Parker, how can people find you, follow you, read your incredible content that you put out, that you're just such a genius at how you write? I'm the biggest fan ever.
Thank you. So, wwd.com, sourcingjournal.com. You can reach me at lparker@sourcingjournal.com. I still have my old Sourcing Journal email. My Instagram is laurenparker77. Although I don't really post a lot of industry content there, but you can follow me on LinkedIn. I think that's the best. Just look me up on LinkedIn, Lauren Parker.
That's what I tell people. That's where the old people are, to humble brag. So it's everything that you'll see on Instagram and TikTok, but done with old people without the videos. So
yes, exactly. I'm old. I admit it.
Oh my gosh. Well, you look good and that's all that matters. Nobody else cares about the age. Lauren, thank you so much for being part of this. Follow Lauren, and we're absolutely going to be having you back for an update of industry for sure. This has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate and review and follow us on every single platform at Handbag Designer. Thanks so much. See you next time.